I went to my daughter-in-law's house to return her coat. When I hung it in her closet, something fell from the inner pocket. 3 photographs. I picked them up, not thinking much of it, but what I saw left me frozen in place. It was Aurelius, my son, who had died 8 months ago. But something was terribly wrong with these pictures. Terribly wrong. And I began to wonder if I truly understood anything about my own family at all. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from, because what I discovered that day changed everything I thought I knew about family. The December morning air bit sharp against my windshield as I wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains. My daughter-in-law Isadora's charcoal gray coat folded on the passenger seat. She'd left it after Sunday dinner, and with Virginia winter settling in hard, I figured she'd need it before the week was out. Isadora had always been particular about her things. Everything in its place, every detail perfect. It's what made her such a good nurse at the county hospital. But sometimes I wondered if all that control came from somewhere deeper. Aurelius used to tease her about it, called her his beautiful perfectionist, with that grin that could light up any room. I pulled into her empty driveway. Her Honda was gone Monday morning shift, same as always. Good thing I kept that spare key she'd given me when she first married my son. The modern house felt hollow, without her presence, all glass and steel angles that never quite belonged in these ancient hills. I made my way to the front closet, shaking my head at how organized everything was. Coats arranged by seasoned shoes lined up like they were ready for inspection. I slipped her coat onto its hanger, adjusting it carefully. That's when something crinkled in the inner pocket. Just loose photographs folded once and tucked deep where you wouldn't find them unless you were really looking. I shouldn't have pulled them out. A decent man would have respected his daughter-in-law's privacy, but my fingers moved before my conscience could stop them. 3 photographs unfolded in my palm. The first showed a man in a pale blue hospital gown sitting up in what looked like a medical bed. Alert, conscious, very much alive. The second was closer. Same man's face, clearer, looking directly at the camera with tired but aware eyes. The third one stopped my heart cold. Aurelius, my son, my boy who'd been dead and buried for 8 months. But there he was, breathing, looking exhausted but unmistakably alive. The date stamp in the corner read December 9th. Yesterday. Why? The question hammered in my skull like a drumbeat. Why would Isadora have pictures of my dead son? Why did he look so thin, so tired? Why was he in what looked like some kind of medical facility? My hands started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the photos. 8 months. 8 months of grief, of missing my boy, of watching Isadora cry at his funeral, while I held her up because she seemed too broken to stand. 8 months of believing the story about the boating accident, the search teams, the empty casket we buried because they never found his body. But if these pictures were real, if that was really Aurelius, my daughter-in-law wasn't who I thought she was. But what did that mean? What had she done? What was she doing? The questions spun in my head like a tornado, each one more terrifying than the last. If Aurelius was alive, where had he been all this time? Why hadn't he come home? Why did he look like he was in some kind of hospital? And why, God help me, why did my daughter-in-law have pictures of him hidden in her coat? The sound of a car engine cut through my spiraling thoughts. I looked out the window and felt every drop of blood drain from my face. Isadora's Honda was turning into the driveway 3 hours before her shift was supposed to end. My hands were still shaking, still holding photographs that turned everything I thought I knew upside down. The jingle of keys at the front door, the metallic click of the lock. She was coming inside. My heart hammered as footsteps echoed in the hallway. In one desperate motion, I pulled out my phone and quickly snapped photos of each picture, my hands shaking as I tried to keep them steady. Then I carefully tucked the originals back exactly where I'd found them, deep in her coat's inner pocket. Chris Isadora's voice carried that familiar warmth, but now it sounded different. "What are you doing here?" She appeared in her hospital scrubs, dark hair pulled back in that neat ponytail. For 8 months, I'd seen grief in those green eyes. Now I wondered what I was really looking at. "Just returning your coat," I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Figured you'd need it with this cold snap." Her gaze flicked to the closet, then back to me. Something flickered across her face as she moved closer, her hand reaching casually toward the coat. My stomach clenched as she patted the pockets, her fingers lingering just a moment too long. "That's so thoughtful." She seemed satisfied with whatever she felt there. I was wondering where I'd left it. "Sunday dinner was nice," I said, desperate to fill the silence. "Thanks for the pot roast." Of course. You know how much I enjoy our family dinners. Her smile looked painted on. It's one of the few things that still feels normal. Normal. What was normal about a grieving widow having photographs of her supposedly dead husband? Well, I should let you get settled, I said, backing toward the door. Long shift, I'm sure. Actually, I came home early today. She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that seemed too sharp. Headache. You know how it is. No, I didn't. Isadora never left work early. She was the most dedicated nurse at County General. The one who stayed late, took extra shifts, never called in sick. Hope you feel better. I'm sure I will. She walked me to the door, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. Drive safe, Chris. These mountain roads can be dangerous. The drive home passed in a blur. Inside my kitchen, I pulled up the photos on my phone, enlarging them under the bright overhead light. There was no denying it. That was Aurelius, tired, thin, but unmistakably alive. When was the last time I'd actually seen my son? Really seen him, not just the closed casket, not just the memorial service where we'd celebrated his life while staring at an empty box. The boating accident. That's what they'd told me. Aurelius had gone out on Shenandoah Lake that Saturday morning, wanting to clear his head before a work presentation. They'd found his boat overturned, his life jacket floating empty. The current was strong, they said. Bodies sometimes never surfaced. I'd believed every word. Because why wouldn't I? The alternative that my daughter-in-law was somehow involved in my son's disappearance was unthinkable. But now, staring at these phone images, the unthinkable was staring back at me. How had I never questioned the details? Why hadn't I demanded to see the accident site myself? Why had I let Isadora handle all the arrangements, all the paperwork, all the decisions about the funeral? Because she was grieving too, I'd told myself. Because she needed my support, or because she'd been managing me all along. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. The caller ID made ice form in my veins. Isadora? I let it ring twice, trying to remember how a grieving father should sound. Hello? Chris, I wanted to check on you. You seemed a little off when you left. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, I managed, settling into my kitchen chair. Just tired, I guess. The grandfather clock chimed 11:47 as sleep began tapping against the windows. Outside, winter wind rattled my old farmhouse. I couldn't sleep, Isadora said, and her tone sounded different. Less warm, more clinical. I kept thinking about today. You seemed distant. I stared at my phone screen at the photos I'd taken. Aurelius's face looked back at me alive and breathing somewhere unknown. Distant how? Maybe I'm overthinking it. She paused. When I got home, I had this strange feeling someone had been through my things. My blood turned cold. Through your things? It's hard to explain. Nothing was missing. Nothing was obviously moved. Just a feeling, you know, like someone had touched what they shouldn't have. Her laugh sounded forced. Sometimes grief makes us paranoid, doesn't it? It does, I agreed, wondering whose grief was real. How have you been sleeping? Chris, really sleeping, not just the polite answer. The question caught me off guard. Fine. Why? I worry about you, living alone in that big house, dealing with memories. Even strong people have breaking points. I'm managing. Are you today? You seemed agitated, nervous, like you were in a hurry to leave. She was fishing, testing whether I'd discovered something. I had paperwork to catch up on, I lied. End-of-year business stuff. Of course. A longer pause. Chris, do you ever really think about Aurelius's accident? The question hit like a physical blow. What do you mean? Sometimes I wonder if we accepted the story too easily. No witnesses, no body, just an overturned boat. Her voice went soft, hypnotic. Don't you think it's strange that someone as careful as Aurelius would go out alone on such a rough morning? Was she testing my knowledge or making some twisted confession? The police investigated thoroughly. Did they small-town departments don't have resources for lengthy investigations, especially when everything appears straightforward? Her voice dropped to a whisper. I think we should talk more about Aurelius. Share our memories, our doubts. Help each other process what really happened. What really happened. The words hung between us like a challenge. Maybe you're right. Good. I was thinking I might come by tomorrow evening. We could have dinner, look through old photos. Would that be all right? Every instinct screamed at me to refuse. Of course. Wonderful. Try to get some rest, Chris. And remember, if you need anything, I'm here. We're family, after all. The line went dead. I sat in my dark kitchen sleep, drumming harder now, trying to process what had happened. Every question, every pause had felt calculated, like she was evaluating my responses, measuring my reactions. The woman I'd thought was my grieving daughter-in-law was something else entirely. Something that studied people, manipulated them, tested their weaknesses. A flash of light swept across my kitchen wall. I looked toward the window and felt my heart stop. Headlights were moving slowly past my house, the car barely crawling along the rural road that led only to my property and the abandoned Miller farm beyond. In 8 years of living here, no one had ever driven this road at midnight, unless they were coming to see me. The car paused at the end of my driveway headlights, pointing toward my house for what felt like an eternity. Then it crept forward, disappearing into the darkness beyond my property line. But I knew it would be back. Dawn was breaking when I pulled into Thornfield Manufacturing's parking lot, hands shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. That car cruising past my house had kept me awake, turning over every word of Isadora's phone call. Kenneth Morrison's pickup was already there. In 35 years of friendship, he'd never let me down. "You look like hell," Kenneth said as I unlocked the office. "Feel worse?" I led him inside where Franklin Cooper waited with coffee and a manila folder. Franklin was Kenneth's recommendation, former state police detective turned private investigator. Quiet, methodical, missed nothing. I showed them the photos on my phone. Kenneth leaned forward while Franklin remained neutral. "Jesus Christ," Kenneth breathed. "That's Aurelius." "Alive and being held somewhere," I said. "Found these hidden in Isadora's coat." Franklin studied each image. "Medical facility. Not a hospital, too controlled. Somewhere private." "Kenneth, I need to know if I'm losing my mind." "You're not crazy." Kenneth's voice was firm. "I should have said something months ago. Never trusted her. Never liked how fast everything moved after the accident." Franklin cleared his throat. "Mr. Morrison hired me 3 months ago to investigate your son's disappearance. Unofficially." The words hit like a blow. "You've been investigating quietly." Franklin opened his folder. "The official story has holes. No real witnesses to the accident. Timeline doesn't work either. Isadora reported Aurelius missing at 9:15. But marina records show his boat wasn't checked out until 8:30. Pretty narrow window." "Tell him about her background," Kenneth said. Franklin flipped pages. Isadora Mitchell worked as a psychiatric nurse at 3 facilities. Terminated from her last position for boundary violations with patients. My stomach dropped. "What violations?" "Records are sealed, but my contact says unauthorized medication adjustments and emotional manipulation of vulnerable patients." Kenneth leaned forward. "Show him the financial stuff." Franklin produced more documents. Large insurance payout 6 weeks after the accident. $200,000. But she also had power of attorney over Aurelius's accounts. Regular withdrawals, small amounts. But they add up to $15,000 over 8 months. All cash. She's been stealing from him. Or paying for something, Franklin said quietly. Something requiring regular cash payments. Something untraceable. The room fell silent. Outside, sunrise painted the mountains gold, reminding me of better times when I believed my son was dead, instead of trapped by the woman I'd welcomed into my family. "What now?" I asked. Franklin closed the folder. "I've been tracking her movements. Daily routine, where she goes, who she sees." He met my eyes. "There's something you should know. She visits a place regularly, every Tuesday and Friday afternoon. Always alone, always exactly 2 hours. Where? That's what we need to find out." "But Chris?" Franklin's expression grew serious. "Whatever she's doing there, whatever she's paying for with that cash, it's connected to those photos. And if your son is alive, if he's being held somewhere—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Time was running out. The winding forest road to Franklin's interesting address cut through dense West Virginia wilderness. That reminded me painfully of better times. These mountains had once been a sanctuary where Aurelius and I spent weekends camping, teaching him to read the stars and identify animal tracks in the mud. Now they felt like a tomb. "GPS shows we're close," Franklin said from the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the tree line with professional wariness. Kenneth followed behind us in his truck, maintaining radio contact in case we needed backup. The cabin appeared around a sharp bend, tucked so deep into the forest canopy that satellite images would barely catch it. From the outside it looked abandoned. Weathered logs, overgrown landscaping windows dark and empty. But Franklin noticed what I'd missed. Fresh tire tracks in the mud. Recent oil stains in that clearing where someone's been parking. We approached on foot, leaving our vehicles hidden down the road. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the whisper of wind through bare branches and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "Back windows unlocked," Franklin whispered, testing the frame. Probably how she gets in and out without neighbors noticing. The interior hit us like a physical blow. What had once been a rustic mountain retreat had been transformed into something clinical and sterile. A hospital bed dominated the main room, complete with restraint straps and an IV stand. Medical monitors lined one wall, their screens dark but ready. The air smelled of disinfectant and something else, something that made my stomach turn. Jesus, Kenneth breathed behind us. What is this place? Franklin was already photographing everything with methodical precision. Medical equipment, professional grade. Someone's been running a private facility here. I moved deeper into the cabin, my legs feeling unsteady. A desk in the corner held stacks of journals, their pages covered in neat handwriting. I opened one at random and immediately wished I hadn't. Day 47. Subject shows continued resistance to conditioning protocols. Increasing dosage of haloperidol may be necessary to achieve compliance. Note: subject still asks about family members. Memory suppression incomplete. My hands shook as I flipped through more entries. Months of documentation, clinical observations about someone's systematic psychological destruction. Photos were paper-clipped to many pages, images showing a man's gradual deterioration, his eyes growing more vacant with each shot. Chris, Franklin's voice was tight. You need to see this. He'd found a hidden door behind what looked like a supply closet. Stone steps led down into darkness, and the smell that drifted up made bile rise in my throat. The basement was worse. More sophisticated equipment cameras mounted in every corner and walls, lined with charts tracking vital signs, medication schedules, and something labeled behavioral modification progress. Kenneth emerged from a corner holding a manila folder. There's more locations. Look at this map's addresses, rental agreements. This isn't the only place. A corkboard on the far wall held dozens of photographs, not just of the deteriorating man upstairs, but surveillance shots of other people. People going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched, studied, selected. I found myself staring at a photo of Aurelius, leaving his office building, taken months before his supposed accident. Someone had drawn red circles around his face and written notes in the margins. Target acquired. Preliminary assessment complete. Franklin, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How long has this been going on? Before he could answer, we all heard it. The distant rumble of a car engine growing closer through the forest. Franklin immediately killed his flashlight, plunging us into darkness. Someone's coming, Kenneth hissed from upstairs, and they're coming fast. Through the basement window, I caught a glimpse of headlights cutting through the trees, still distant, but approaching along the same road we'd used. We were trapped. The front door opened with deliberate slowness, and Isadora stepped into the cabin carrying a hunting rifle. She wore dark clothing and moved with cold precision. Hello, Chris. Her voice carried none of the warmth I'd known for 3 years. You shouldn't have come here. We stood frozen, surrounded by evidence of her crimes. The woman I'd thought was my grieving daughter-in-law had become something calculating and dangerous. Your interference has been disappointing. She continued, settling the rifle against her shoulder. I really hoped we could avoid this. Where is my son? Aurelius is comfortable, safe. She smiled, and it chilled my blood. He's been my guest at a more suitable facility for 8 months now. Guest. She talked about imprisonment like hospitality. The accident was well planned, don't you think? No awkward questions, clean insurance payout. Everyone moved on with their grief while I continued my work. Your work? Franklin kept his voice steady despite the rifle aimed at him. Improvement. Aurelius had so many flaws, independence, stubbornness, that annoying attachment to his old life. But the right treatments can eliminate such problems. My stomach turned. You've been torturing him. I've been perfecting him. Her eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm. This cabin was just for preliminary research. The real work happens elsewhere. She gestured around the room like a proud scientist showing off her laboratory. My methods have been tested before. Previous subjects taught me valuable lessons about dosage duration, resistance patterns. She shrugged casually. Some experiments succeed better than others. The way she discussed human suffering made my blood freeze. But Aurelius has been special, more challenging. It's taken longer than expected to break down his core identity, but we're making excellent progress. Her expression darkened. Until you started meddling. Franklin had been slowly reaching into his jacket, a phone trying to call for help without her noticing. The plan was elegant, Isadora continued. 6 more months of conditioning, then bring him home as a grateful, dependent, devoted husband. And eventually, Chris, when you became inconvenient, there might have been another accident. These things happen to elderly men living alone. You were planning to kill me. Nothing personal. I simply needed complete control. She raised the rifle slightly. But now you've forced an immediate solution. Through the window, red and blue lights flashed through the forest. Franklin's signal had worked. Isadora saw them too. Her calm mask cracked, revealing something feral underneath. You called them. Her finger moved toward the trigger. You've ruined everything. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the trees. She had seconds to decide, shoot us, and face a murder charge or run and hope to escape. This isn't over, she snarled, backing toward the rear door. You have no idea where he is. No idea what condition he's in after 8 months of treatment. Even if you find him, you might not like what's left. She crashed through the back door into the dense forest, leaving us alive but haunted by her final words. Kenneth rushed to the window. She's gone into the woods. Franklin was already coordinating with the approaching police units on his radio, but I stood frozen in that cabin of horrors, staring at the evidence of my son's nightmare. We'd survived the confrontation, but Aurelius was still out there somewhere, slowly dying in a facility we couldn't locate. And Isadora's words echoed in my head. You might not like what's left. The forest swallowed us as we pursued Isadora through dense undergrowth. Years of hiking these mountains with Aurelius had taught me to read. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, the signs of someone moving desperately through unfamiliar terrain. She's heading northwest. I called to Franklin. Old logging road that way. Detective Cross's voice crackled through Franklin's radio. Units in position. Keep her moving toward the road. We crested a ridge and saw another cabin larger than the first, with generator lights glowing through curtained windows. This was where the real work happened. Through a window I caught a glimpse that stopped my heart. Aurelius was there, alive, sitting on a hospital bed, thin and pale but conscious, moving slowly like someone fighting through heavy medication. Franklin signaled to wait while he positioned at the back entrance. But I couldn't wait. Not when my son was 20 feet away after 8 months. I went through the front door. Chris Isadora spun around holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. I warned you to stay away. Aurelius looked up at my voice, confusion clearing from his eyes. Dad! His voice was hoarse but real. Hello, son. Don't move, Isadora commanded, pressing the syringe against Aurelius's neck. This contains enough potassium chloride to stop his heart in seconds. 1 step closer and your reunion becomes a funeral. I froze, watching my son struggle to understand what was happening. It's over, Isadora, I said carefully. Police are here. Nowhere left to run. If I can't have him the way I wanted, nobody can have him at all. Behind her, Franklin crept through the back door. But Isadora was focused on me, finger poised over the plunger. 8 months of work, and you've ruined everything. You were killing him. I was perfecting him. That's when Aurelius moved. Despite the drugs, despite months of captivity, my son found strength to grab Isadora's wrist and twist it away from his neck. The syringe flew across the room as they struggled. Franklin tackled her from behind, sending all 3 crashing into medical equipment. Isadora broke free and ran for the door. She made it 50 yards into the forest before darkness and uneven terrain claimed her. Her scream echoed off the mountains, then went silent. I was already kneeling beside my son, pulling him into an embrace I'd thought I'd never have again. Dad, he whispered, I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't stop looking. But even holding him, I could feel how thin he'd become, how his hands shook from whatever drugs she'd been feeding him. Paramedics rushed in, checking vitals, asking questions I couldn't answer. We need to get him to a hospital immediately, one said. Pulse is irregular and we don't know what medications or dosages he's been given. As they loaded Aurelius onto a stretcher, I caught his hand. Am I going to be okay? He asked, sounding like the scared little boy I'd once comforted after nightmares. I wanted to promise everything would be fine, but looking at his hollow cheeks and trembling voice, I wasn't sure what 8 months of Isadora's treatment had cost him. The ambulance doors closed and I followed in Franklin's car, praying we'd found him in time. 3 days later, I sat beside Aurelius's hospital bed, watching color slowly return to his face. The doctors had worked around the clock to flush the cocktail of psychiatric drugs from his system, and while his hands still trembled occasionally, his eyes were clear for the first time since I'd found him. I remember everything now, he said quietly, staring at his hands. Every day, every injection, every lie, she told me. Detective Cross sat across from us with a recorder and notepad documenting what would become the foundation of the prosecution's case. But for me, this was about more than justice. This was about understanding how the woman I'd trusted with my family had destroyed our lives so completely. Start from the beginning, Cross said gently. The morning of the boating accident. Aurelius closed his eyes. There was no boating accident. Isadora called me that Saturday, said she was having car trouble near the marina. Asked if I could pick her up before my fishing trip. His voice was steady but hollow. When I got there, she was waiting with coffee. Said she'd made it as a thank you. I drank it in the car. The drug took effect quickly. Within minutes. I remember trying to ask what she'd done, but I couldn't speak properly. She drove me to that first cabin, the one you found. When I woke up, I was strapped to a hospital bed. I felt my hands clench into fists. How long were you conscious? It varied. She kept me heavily sedated most of the time, but there were periods when the drugs wore off enough for me to understand what was happening. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. She told me you thought I was dead, that everyone had given up looking, that I had no family left who cared. We never stopped looking, I said fiercely. Kenneth hired Franklin months ago because something felt wrong about the whole story. Detective Cross leaned forward. Did she ever explain why she was keeping you alive? She called it her project. Said she was going to fix everything that was wrong with me, my independence, my stubbornness, my attachment to my old life. She wanted to erase who I was and rebuild me into someone who would worship her. The clinical way he described his own psychological torture made my stomach turn. The medications were designed to make me compliant, confused, dependent on her for everything. She would visit twice a week, sometimes more, always bringing new drugs, new techniques. His voice cracked. She made videos of our sessions, called them progress reports. Cross made notes. We found those recordings. They'll be crucial evidence. There's something else, Aurelius said, looking directly at me. She talked about you constantly, Dad, about how you were getting old, how you'd be easier to manage than me. She had plans. What kind of plans? She was going to bring me home eventually once I was properly conditioned. Present me as a changed man grateful for her care during my recovery from the accident trauma. And then when you grew frail enough, there would be another tragedy. Heart attack, maybe. Stress-related. The room went silent. I'd known Isadora was dangerous, but hearing the systematic nature of her long-term planning chilled me to the bone. Mr. Thornfield. Detective Cross said, you should know that we've been in contact with law enforcement in Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon. Isadora Mitchell has been operating under different names for over a decade. We've identified at least 3 other victims, wealthy men who died in suspicious accidents shortly after marrying her. 3 others. Insurance payouts totaling over $2 million. She's been perfecting this scheme for years. You and Aurelius were just her latest targets. I thought about all the times she'd comforted me in my grief, all the family dinners where she'd played the role of devoted daughter-in-law, all the moments when I'd felt grateful for her presence in our lives. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison, Cross continued. Multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. The evidence is overwhelming. Aurelius reached for my hand. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Anything. After everything that's happened, after what she put us both through, do you think we can get back what we had? Can our relationship survive this? I looked at my son thinner than before, marked by trauma. I couldn't fully understand, but alive and fighting to reclaim his life, and felt something break open in my chest. Dude, son, we're going to build something stronger than what we had before. Spring arrived early in the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the hillsides in shades of green I'd forgotten were possible. 3 months had passed since that night in the forest, and the world felt brighter now, like I was seeing it through eyes washed clean. Aurelius stood at my office window watching morning sun burn off the mountain mist. He'd returned to work 2 weeks ago, easing back into responsibilities with careful pace. The tremor in his hands was gone, and his laugh sounded genuine again. The Peterson contract came through, he said, turning with a smile that reminded me of the boy he'd been. Biggest order in 5 years. That's wonderful. 6 months ago, business would have been my primary concern. Now it felt like a pleasant bonus to what really mattered, having my son alive and working beside me. We'd both been seeing Dr. Sarah Mitchell twice weekly since his hospital release. Learning to process trauma, to trust again. For Aurelius, confronting 8 months of psychological torture. For me, accepting how grief had made me vulnerable to manipulation. I was thinking we could take that fishing trip this weekend, he said, settling across from my desk. If you're up for it. We hadn't been fishing since before his disappearance, hadn't talked about returning to waters where Isadora began her deception. But maybe that was what we needed to reclaim those places, make new memories where lies had taken root. Same spot where I taught you to cast when you were 8. Same spot, though I might actually catch something this time. The banter felt natural, easy. We were finding our rhythm again, building something both familiar and entirely new. Isadora had been sentenced to life, without parole. 4 counts of murder, kidnapping, fraud. She would never hurt another family like she'd hurt ours. The Thornfield Foundation for Missing Persons had launched last month, using money I'd once planned to leave entirely to Aurelius. Now we were helping other families navigate the nightmare we'd survived. Dad, Aurelius said, something shifting in his tone. I've been thinking about dating again. Nothing serious, just getting back out there. Dr. Mitchell says it's healthy. Relief flooded through me, followed by pride. 3 months ago, he could barely trust his own perceptions. Now he was ready to open his heart again. I think that's wonderful. Maybe we could meet her first when you're ready. He laughed genuinely. I figured you'd say that. And yes, absolutely. No more secrets in this family. No more secrets. Our unofficial motto. The principle we'd built our new relationship on. Complete honesty even when uncomfortable. That evening we sat on my porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Aurelius had stayed for dinner, a weekly tradition, now content. In comfortable silence, listening to night sounds of the countryside. You know what I realized today, he said eventually. What's that? I'm stronger than I thought. We both are. He looked at me with eyes that had seen hell and chosen hope. She tried to break me for 8 months, tried to erase everything I was, but she couldn't. The important stuff, the love, the memories, the person you raised me to be, that was deeper than anything she could reach. Tears pricked my eyes. I'm proud of you, son. Prouder than I've ever been. I'm proud of us, for not giving up, for fighting our way back to each other. Stars were coming out now, the same constellations I'd taught him to identify during long-ago camping trips. Tonight they felt like promises instead of memories. We'd survived the worst thing that could happen to a family, and we'd done it together. That was enough. That was everything. Looking back on those 8 months of grief, I realize how blindly I trusted someone who was destroying my family from within. Don't be like me. Don't let your pain make you vulnerable to those who would exploit your love. The hardest lesson I learned is that evil often wears the mask of kindness. Isadora played the perfect daughter-in-law while systematically planning our destruction. But God has a way of revealing truth when we need it most, and He gave me the strength to fight for my son when it mattered most. This true story taught me that family bonds run deeper than any manipulation. When I found those photographs, I could have dismissed them as impossible. Instead, I chose to investigate, to question what I'd been told. Grandpa's stories like mine aren't just about survival. They're about the power of a parent's love to overcome unimaginable obstacles. Aurelius survived 8 months of psychological torture because the foundation we built together was stronger than any drug or conditioning. God protected him through that darkness, just as He guided me to the truth. Even when everything seemed lost, faith and determination kept us going. The true story I'm sharing isn't just my experience, it's a warning. Trust your instincts. Question inconsistencies. Don't let grief cloud your judgment the way I did. And remember, God works through ordinary people like Kenneth and Franklin who refuse to let injustice stand. These grandpa stories matter because they remind us that even in our darkest moments, hope survives. True stories of resilience inspire others facing similar battles. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love against impossible odds? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring grandpa stories that prove love conquers all.